I'll start with a story. My in-laws live in my house. And typically when I'm in the marriage class, everyone goes, "Aw." But my in-laws have lived with me for a very long time. And they live with us, and we really enjoy having them with us. But the biggest challenge is they live with us because they have to, not because they want to. And so when they first moved in with us, they started with us. We had lived in Florida. They joined us. We had just had a baby. It was going to be great. Now, mind you, they have lots of other kids, but the socioeconomics where they're from in southwestern Michigan weren't great. Weather also is not very good there for a big chunk of the year. And so they decided to join us, and they lived with us for a short time before getting their own place. They got their own place, they got some jobs, and they were taking care of themselves, and we just enjoyed fellowship as often as we could. Over time, my job transferred us to Texas. Thank God. We're very glad we're here. We've been here now 17 years. Over that time, my father and mother-in-law moved over with us to Texas, and they lived with us for a very short period of time, but then before they got a chance to get their own place, they had to move up to Michigan again. And they had to do that because one of my wife's siblings, her brother, had a failed back surgery and needed some help. And so they went up there. And they went up there and spent about a year and a half. We interacted with them. We went and visited from time to time and enjoyed time with family up there as well. 2 years later, I got a call that changed everything for me. So my father-in-law called me. And it wasn't very common for him to pick up the phone and call. He wasn't one of those kind of chatty guys, but we had a good relationship, so I answered the phone. And he just started, some niceties, and then he told me, he said, "I think it's time that we move back in." I said, "Okay." I was expecting that call at some point in time. That was kind of the plan. They'd go up there and then come back. And I said, "No problem, we'll start making arrangements." And he said, "I don't think you understand." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? We've lived together before." He said, "We can't afford to move out once we move in. So we've got nothing left." My mother-in-law had an injury that's preventing her from being able to earn an income, although she didn't make a very big income. He's aging, and they can't keep up with medical bills, rent, life costs, and they can't do it anymore. Now, my father-in-law, when he had that conversation with me, became a broken man. He worked 40 years as an independent truck driver. He made a lot of money. And if it was time to go to the orthodontist, I laugh because he'd tell the story, right? He would go to the orthodontist, and for those of you who have kids who have ever gotten braces or you've gotten them yourself, they're expensive, right? And so as soon as they're done giving you how much the cost is, they start giving you the finance plan. And of course, he was that guy. He'd reach in his overalls and pull out the $5,000, and it was like a game show. 100, 200, he'd just pay the bill right then and there. He wouldn't go on credit or do any of that kind of stuff. He just made money. And when it was time to take the kids on a Disney vacation, he literally just drove a whole lot more, picked up extra loads, did whatever he had to do. And when he got to the Disney counter, he paid in cash. I don't think they allow that anymore, but he simply would just pay, right? And so it was relatively easy for him. So this man worked his butt off. It wasn't like he just, kind of floated through and spent all the money, but he didn't know what to do with it. He didn't trust people who spoke in financial terms, probably because he grew up with the same message. We don't talk about that kind of stuff. If you're gonna talk to someone, they're probably trying to sell you something, right? So he never got any financial education other than the ability to run his business. Interestingly enough, I started to go, wait a minute, I'm doing the exact same thing. My father-in-law knew how to make money in business, and I was working for a company for a long period of time where most of my time was spent making the company money and making sure from a budgetary perspective they were doing financially good. But I didn't do it in my own house. And I said, this has to change, because I don't want to pick up the phone one day and call my kids and have the same conversation. Doesn't mean I'm not going to call them and tell them I'm moving in at some point in time, just to get the reaction, just to have some fun with them. But in the meantime, that's my primary motivation for getting started on this financial journey and realizing all of us can do this. And so my bride and I took the Financial Peace University class because a flyer came home with our daughter from, she was attending a church preschool, and a flyer came home and we went to the class, and we kind of did it a little bit, and we didn't do a great job with it, but then that happened, and I said, I know this information really well. We need to do something different. And so we got together, and I'll tell you, first few conversations were not that easy, but we continued to work through it, and as we worked through it, it really started to make a difference, and we changed our lives. So in about 18 months, we got out of consumer debt and started to get some financial peace in our house. Our original plan was over 3 years. And so as we started to gain some traction, it started to make a big difference. And we're gonna talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of that today and how we go. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand how we relate to money. So some of us are spenders, some of us are naturally savers, some of us are married to each other, right? Some of us are nerds and like doing things like budgets, and some of us are free spirits going, hey, you do the budget, I'll just go have some fun over here. And we need each other for that. So for those of you who are nerds, you're great at doing these budget things, you're great at paying attention to that, but you're not always the most fun people, right? So I'm one of those. And so sometimes we need that free spirit next to us to help us out and balance all that out. So we understand how we want to relate to money. And this is how most of us start. We're a responsible person. We go through high school and we say, hey, when I'm out of the house, I'm going to do all of these things my way, and I'm going to structure things in a way. And then we do what I did. While I was in college, I got my first credit card. I got my first car loan. I got my first debt, and I started to play with that, and I started to realize that I would go use that card and I would get home and I didn't feel anything. It was all right. Other than some joy, I just got some cool stuff, right? And then the bill would come at the end of the month and it wasn't that big yet. It didn't matter that much, right? So I paid a little bit on it. And by the way, on that $500 balance credit card, I can only pay 25 bucks this month. And they were happy. The bank was okay with that. They were smarter than I was because I knew I didn't pay attention to the fact that all that was doing was paying some interest. Right? So the purchase I had made was getting more and more expensive. So I got another credit card because I needed more money. And I got another credit card and another one. Then I got married and she had a credit card or two. And then we got another car. And the next thing you know, children came, right? And children are expensive. I don't know if any of you, children are expensive. But we started to understand, right? And so I started to realize that as a responsible person, there was something else that was drawing me to make not so good decisions. And so I was preparing for the presentation today. I asked God to give me an image of a creature that he has created in his kingdom that is the most selfish creature that you could ever imagine, right? And I thought this was going to take a little time and it would come to me. Instant, I got a cat. You have a cat. So, right, cats, they only do things for one reason, and that's because they want to, right? And so some of us walk around with this cat all the time, doing things with us, right? And unfortunately, these cats are helping us to make financial decisions. Some of those cats are children. I have a boy and two girls. My boy's the oldest, and from the time he was young, I didn't have a single problem telling him no. I'd be like, nah, dude, we can't do that. Some of you dads are laughing out there because they would tell me something, and I'd say, no, babe, we can't do that. And then they would give me but daddy. And I would say, hey, babe, I'm done. I can't handle this pressure. And so my bride would have to tell them no, which she's really good at for them. So, but even to this day. And so in the meantime, sometimes the self-gratification cat is that. And it wasn't that my children made me do things like that. It was because I wanted to make them happy, right? I was the one that wanted the gratification of spending the money. Sometimes it's a new purse or some new shoes. For me, it's dining out. I like to go out to eat. And so it was different things that made this self-gratification cat start to run my financial life. And I realized I wasn't paying any attention to the cat until I realized there was something that scares the cat. And that was the storm. I don't know if any of you who have cats, you get one of these storms we've had in the last few weeks and they disappear. They just go away, right? You can't find them. For those of you who are dog lovers, they usually sit next to you and console you through that process. But cats, on the other hand, I do have a cat in my house, by the way. But in the meantime, cats are afraid of the storm, and we're kind of freaked out by them too sometimes, right? Depending on how bad they are or how big they are. We chose to live in this area, so we get to experience them a lot, some worse than others. But in the meantime, these storms hit us all the time. A car breakdown, appliance breakdown, child breakdown, sometimes a job layoff. I've got a lot of friends in the oil and gas industry. And so they go through some great times, and then all of a sudden things aren't so great. And then hopefully they come back within the amount of time that they have gotten their golden parachute or some sort of a layoff plan, but sometimes they don't. And so these things happen in life, and they help us to get back on track. They help us to say, what would a responsible person do now? And so we need to kind of go back to the thought process here. When we were a responsible person, in our right mind, not too distracted by the self-gratification cat, we started to plan our outcomes and we had some ideas on what that would look like. So we took control. And so, by the way, this cat behind the scenes is actually strapped down to the seat that it's sitting in. It was going to run away, but we made it sit there for a few minutes while it did a budget. And so now we need to start telling our money where to go. And so we'll start with the basic nuts and bolts. When I'm not doing financial work, I'm an excellent artist. I was actually going to draw this live, but I decided, you know what, for the sake of time, let me go ahead and put these things up here. Those are clouds, for those of you who couldn't tell. spent a lot of time on this, but the artwork continues to get better. The first thing that oftentimes people don't pay enough attention to is income. Some of us, it's pretty simple, right? We're a W-2, we get paid every week, every other week, once a month, whatever the case may be. We get a check and it's pretty consistent, right? So that money's coming in. Some of us are business owners, 1099 contractors, and gosh, I have some really good friends who are in the construction industry right now, and the last month has been horrible for them because of the weather, right? They're trying to build houses or do things that are outside and they can't work. And that gets delayed and everything in front of it gets delayed. And so they've got to make some adjustments. But in order to do that, they have to have a plan. They have to know. And so knowing that some of the storms can happen, we understand we're going to start with the clouds. Besides, who doesn't like to make it rain these days, right? And so from the clouds, the money then goes into our home. Another amazing picture. If you guys want a minute, we'll go ahead and stare at that for a minute. So in the house is where we spend our money. And we always say the first step of the budget is to consider the basic necessities, the four walls of the house, right? You need to eat, you need to pay your mortgage or rent, you need to pay utilities and basic clothing needs. In our marketplace, transportation's a need. You can't get too far on a scooter these days in our marketplace here. And so those are your basic needs, and we need to plan those expenses, but we also need to plan all the other expenses too, because we can't pretend they're not going to show up, right? The internet bill, dining out, insurance, plan the fun money so you don't feel bad after you spend it, but plan it. Hi, I'm David, and I like Starbucks. Sorry. But I know how much money I have going there. So we pre-fill from our budget a $50 gift card every month that my bride and I have to share. And of course, her drinks seem to be a lot more expensive than mine. But in the meantime, right? So, and then she uses the points too. I gotta figure this out. But in the meantime, $50 a month, it goes to there and we don't feel bad about it, right? And when the gift card's out for the month, it's done. If we didn't spend enough, then it rolls over to the next month. It's great, but it's already there. It's spent in our budget. We know how much is going out. So it's very clear. Okay, how many married couples here? Okay, married couples. Okay, you two. When's your birthday? November 26th. Write that down. Write that. No, right. Okay, he knows. Good. So I usually don't ask the man for the wife's because then we have to go to marriage class. So, but okay, so you know when her birthday is. So the month before, we should be putting in our budget that we've got some money to spend because we know it's coming. So a lot of us, we get to the day, okay, a week before, we're trying to figure out what to get, and we just go spend money, right? And again, part of that self-gratification is we always say it's better to give than receive, and the gratification is really coming from giving, and so I give very generously and don't plan for it. And so before the class, I did a little bit of research, and if you guys have some note paper there and stuff, write down December 25th this year is when Christmas is coming. Mm-hmm. Next year, I went ahead just so that you guys could plan, right? December 25th. Next year is when Christmas is coming also. I can't tell you how many people show up in our January class because of Christmas, right? Oh my gosh, what did I do? We have all this expenses and all this money. And then typically when we get to the summer class, the first thing that all of them are doing is selling all the stuff they just bought for Christmas 6 months earlier so that they can get ahead of their debt. But the reality is, we forget to budget those things because they're kind of in the back of our mind or they're not consistently happening. Most of us get it. Our electric bill is going to show up next month. And so we plan for that. But then we forget to plan for the things that we need to put in our budget. So we'll have a list of those kind of things. We have a handout for you, and it's a basic starting point. But in the class, we go into much more in-depth parts of how to manage your budget and really start to work with you. One of the biggest differences between our class and some of the ones that I got a chance to attend as I was learning some of this stuff is we want to work with you. We want you to do your homework and bring it to class. We want to meet you outside of class for the difficult conversations or tough things that you're going through to spend some time with you. We don't want you to show up to class, say, okay, we went through financial peace, we feel a lot better about ourselves, and then live the next 20 years in a bad situation where you feel stressed about your financial situation. The goal here is to take some action. And the first step in taking action is this budget process because we really want to understand where we're at. The only way to make a plan is to have some visualization on what this looks like, okay? So budgeting, God gives us some messages on. And one of the things that people don't realize, as I mentioned to you at the beginning, for some reason, we haven't interpreted this way because not enough people say this, because we say we shouldn't talk about money, but God said we should. because God talks about it just as much as love in the Bible. It's talked about more than most other topics. And because of that, God knew we were going to struggle with this. Part of the human condition. We're going to have problems with this. And he didn't say because it's 2024. He said this way before that. And he said, we know these humans are going to struggle with this concept, so we need to give you some words. And one of the best verses that I have, in fact, my company is based here in the Montgomery area, and this is our company verse. And it says, any enterprise that is built by wise planning becomes strong throughout common sense and profits wonderfully by keeping abreast of the facts. It doesn't say keeping abreast of the feelings, because most of us run our financial lives on our feelings. And we're feeling pretty good at the beginning of the month, and then we're feeling really bad at the end of the month, and then we're feeling really good at the end of the month, or the beginning of the month, and then it just keeps cycling that way. Or we have a windfall and we feel great, and then we have a bad time and we feel bad. We don't have to have that roller coaster. We can plan for this stuff. So, in the budgeting process, we have to understand a couple of quick things. Number one, we need to minimize distractions like Facebook or Catbook, whatever it is you're looking at, right? We need to surround ourselves with people who have the same goals. If you're in a relationship, absolutely, your spouse, your partner should be the one that you're working with on this. And so I wish we could include this as we go through marriage counseling or premarital counseling. We talk about it, but man, we need to beat this into people to say, hey, if you guys aren't aligned financially or have the same goals for what you want for your future, we need to understand, look, I may be the nerd and my wife may be the free spirit, but we still need to work together and understand each other in a way that we can be productive in this process. And so we need to minimize distractions. If you're single, or for whatever reason you're driving the household finances and your partner just simply won't get on the bus yet, then what we need to do is we need to find an accountability partner that will help us, right? And so the accountability partner should not be the friend that you guys sit down, you do the budget, you high five, and then you go shopping, right? So it shouldn't be your shopping buddy, or for those of you dudes who like hunting, it shouldn't be like the hunting guy who you guys are always geeking out and going to the store and buying new stuff. It should be the person who's truly going to hold you accountable and have some of those tough conversations with you, because the self-gratification cat will continue to show up. We're going to have a hard day at work and feel justified. We're going to have worked really hard on something and feel like we've earned something. We're going to need a little retail therapy from time to time. And absolutely do that, but make sure it's part of your plan, right? Have a little walking around money and doing some things that you can do in an effort to really drive that forward in a way that doesn't make you feel bad. And so as we go through the budget, we need to understand that this is our plan. The word budget scares a lot of people, or some people just cringe when they hear it because they don't want to be regulated by it, right? And we spend the beginning stages of our life talking about how we want our own plan, but then when it comes time to actually write one and do it, we don't do the things we need to do. So we need to write our plan and have it in front of us so we can be proactive and not reactive, which most of us don't have financial peace because we're reacting. We don't know what's coming. Our fear is of the unknown, not the known. If we know and our situation is not good, then we can work around it to get some plans together to fix it. The church has tons of resources to provide. We've got some great counseling. We've got, right now, if someone comes with a financial need, they connect them to us and try and help to get them out of that situation so they don't continuously cycle back through that situation, right? So the budget is truly a plan to be in control of what this looks like. And so the goal is to have a monthly budget planning meeting. This sounds like a lot of fun to some of you. I know it can be, right? But for some of you, it sounds like something of dread. And so the reality is sometimes we just need to do this. And so on a monthly basis, and we recommend monthly because that's how most of the bills come in. Your rent or mortgage is due once a month typically. Electric bill, utilities, things like that, car payments if you have them, credit card bills, they all show up once a month, right? Our money doesn't always come in that way, which is why we need to start with an understanding of our income so that when we start to plan our outflow, we can truly understand what that looks like. So the next stage of the budget planning process is we need to be doing a zero-based budget. And the zero-based budget is simply this. Every dollar has a plan. And this is where most Americans fail. So most Americans understand the basics of budget concept. Most of us don't do it, but we do understand the concept. And so when we understand the concept, we start to get to the point where we say, once I've got $50 left over, what's that money going to do? Where's that money going to go? And this is why so many of us end our careers with not enough to save into the future or really enjoy whatever we would consider our non-working years or retirement. And it's because we're not planning the second stage of our lives. And the second stage of our lives should be planned after the household four walls are taken care of, right? So the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be an emergency fund. And we're going to go into more detail on that, so I'm going to blast right through that piece and go into the things that are fun. Let's plan vacations. I can't tell you how many vacations I took in the early stages of my marriage where I was constantly thinking about this. So in my house, I was the primary provider and the financial manager. My bride now manages most of our finances, but before I was. And to the point where I didn't even share with her a lot of the information that was going on or what was in my head about it, not because she didn't want to hear it, simply because we didn't talk about it, right? Because I was told we don't talk about that kind of stuff. And so as we were going through, I can't tell you how many vacations I took where I'm sitting there going, okay, they want this. Do we have enough money for that? I'm looking at my credit card bills every time we finish a day going, okay, is there enough room to pay for the next thing or the next thing? And it was stressful and I was distracted. I wasn't having a good time. I tried not to let that show, but I'm sure it probably did, you know? And in fact, I was probably communicating with work a lot more simply because that was a good way for me to escape and say, okay, well, at least I got money coming in when I get back, and trying to fix it, and I just wasn't, because I didn't know you could actually plan a budget for a vacation. One of my biggest successes was just a few years ago. We went to California on a trip, and I have two daughters, and my son was already moved out of the house at this point, and when we went, we had some plans. We're going to go to Disney, and then we're going to go to the beach, and we're going to go down to San Diego and see the otters and do some cool stuff. And so we get to Disney as the first thing we were doing. And I don't know if any of you have been to Disney, but they're really smart financial managers. When you walk through the gates, you walk in, and the first thing that's there, gift shop. Right away. You haven't even experienced anything, and they're already throwing it in front of you. And so that was the first stop, right? And so we go into the gift shop, and my youngest, who was about 9 at that time, and our next daughter was almost 15 years old. And so we're there having a trip, and my 9-year-old comes up to me with a bunch of stuff in her hands, right? She found a necklace and a shirt and, of course, Mickey ears and all these other things. And thank God, he sent me a message. He said, tell them we have a budget for the day. Because before that day, if I was to start to say no, then it would be a problem, right? So, oh, no, babe, we really can't have this, but Dad, you know, and my daughters are really sweet. And so my bride is in the room now, and so I had to go tell them, hey, babe, you have to go tell them no, because I can't do it. And so, or even worse, most of the time I would just say yes. And also my bride would then be mad at me at that point, because we discussed that we weren't going to do that, but we did it anyway. And so we end up saying yes, and we feel bad about it. And so I said, okay, girls, come here. We're going to have a budget. Now, certain days like Disney, your budget's going to be bigger. Like in Disney, it's going to be $75 or $100, and you can spend it on anything in the gift shop. You can spend it on fairway games or whatever it is you want to do from an activity perspective. Look, I'm not the guy who's like, okay, and you got to pay for your food, and we're going to split the hotel room in 4s, and I didn't go that bad. But in the meantime, it was pretty amazing, because what happened after that was, instead of throwing a fit or even having a problem with what I was saying no to, my daughter started to make the decisions. She looked at what was in her hand. And at that age, she could do the math. It wasn't that complicated, right? And she started to add some things up, and she started to choose things and put things back. Now, if I told her to put those things back, it would have been a problem, right? But she started to do that. And I thought that was pretty amazing. And so throughout the week, the girls would wake up, we'd be all excited for whatever we were doing that day, and the first question out of their mouths was, what's our budget for the day? Even to this day, my daughter does that. We now do that with school shopping. What's my budget? And of course, usually they negotiate now. But in the meantime, so we do this budget thing, and the most amazing thing really happened on the plane ride home. So as most of you know how planes are structured, my bride sat next to our youngest daughter, and I was sitting next to our teenage daughter. And on the way home, my teenage daughter and I are talking. I asked her, what was your favorite part of the trip? All the basic questions. And she goes through a couple things. We're talking. She says, hey, Dad, you owe me $76.46. Like, are you kidding me? Do you know how much money this vacation costs? And she said, yeah, well, you gave us each the same budget every day, but I have some things that I want, so I didn't spend it all. And so, cash, credit card, what are you going to pay with? I'm like, okay, wait a minute here. But I was like, you know what? This is pretty amazing. She got it. said, where was this conversation when she was 8 or 9? And even worse, my son much younger. And so I was like, oh, wow. That's why Jesus said, bring the children, right? Because they trusted with faith. They said, oh, this is how we do things now. I said, okay, yeah, this is how we do things now. And they didn't question it at that point. They just, this is the way we do it. And so it was empowering and controlling, and immediately they started to understand that. Fast forward a couple of years, my daughter at 17 comes to me, she's a junior in high school, and says, hey, when I'm 18, I'm gonna wanna move out of the house. Will you sit with me and help me make a budget? And I was like, oh, like, yeah, of course I will. And so we sat down and we went through utilities, and she's like, man, this is expensive. She actually went and looked at a couple of apartments, and she was looking at one bedroom. She doesn't want to cohabitate with anybody. She doesn't want to have to deal with all that drama. And so she's looking, and she started to understand how all that is. By the way, she's about to be 20. She still lives with us and plans to probably for the next 20 years. So in the meantime, though, she understood. She didn't question. She didn't say, what is this budget thing you're throwing at me? She's like, oh, this is how we do it? Okay, this is how we do it. My son is now 28 years old with no debt, owns his own company, is financially secure, and planning to buy a house. He's saving up a bunch of money for that. And why? Because I did talk about it. He lived through the time when he was young that we just had to say no a lot. Not just because it was easy for me, but because it's real easy when you don't have it, right? Can we have that? No. Well, but I simply cannot pay for that. I don't have the money, right? And now it's different. And so it was pretty powerful. So as we go through these things, we need to plan for the fun just as much as we plan for the other things. Okay, when was your birthday again? We need to make sure. Okay, so all of that stuff. So as we go through, we also don't want it to be overly complicated. So there's a lot of tools out there, and when you receive this, which will be emailed to you, you'll get a live link here. And I just chose NerdWallet because they're just an assessment tool, and they have like the top 10 personal finance applications that you can get. Some are free, some have a cost to them. Pick what you like. We don't really care what tool you use, we just want you to take action and use something. I'm old enough that I still remember that pencils and pens work just fine too. And for those of you who are Excel geeks, make yourself a spreadsheet, have some fun with it, right? And then share it with the person who really has no desire to do anything with that other than look at it and help make decisions. And so as we go through, this is it. And so when I first heard about budgeting, I worked in corporate, right? And so I was thinking to myself that, okay, here's what a simple budget spreadsheet should look like. Right? So I'm like, okay, let me hand this out in class. We're going to have a lot of fun and work on this stuff. And I was like, okay, that's really not what it needs to be. Use a simple budget app or a spreadsheet or something. And the best part is these things repeat themselves, right? You can fill out your mortgage for the entire year if it's the same. You can, you can do the shoulders or really the big hump on your electric bill. It starts out here and then goes like this and then goes like that and then goes back down and, whatever it is, unless we have a long summer, in which case it just goes longer on the top side and those things are there. But I've lived in Texas long enough to know what that's going to look like. By the way, you can call your electric company and find out what the last 2 years look like. And they'll tell you, And so you can budget for those things and it starts to repeat itself and get easier. So as we go through the steps, you're also going to find that it gets easier as we get in control of these things because we have less bills. And everything else is really just part of our plan and nothing is surprising to us. So as we go through the budget process, we have these budget committee meetings. There's actual footage from a first budget committee meeting from one of our students. But they don't have to be like that. And in order for them not to be like that, one of the other things that we need to be doing is we need to be having some dream meetings. We need to be planning the things that we want to do together with our money. I've also talked to couples, and it's okay to plan things you want to do separately when you have the money, right? So there are certain things that we enjoy doing together and certain things we enjoy doing apart and can simply come back together. My bride and I in the last couple years, she went on a ski trip with our son. They had an amazing time. I took our youngest to New York City so that we could see a theater show and do some things there she had never been. We had a great time apart. We enjoyed talking to each other about it, and it was fine. We had a good time, but it was part of our dreams. This is what we'd like to do. And so as you're having those dream meetings, one of the most important parts, and I can't stress this enough, we're visual. When you have a desire, and I'll use a house as an example, if you want to buy a new house and you want to upgrade something, maybe you want to upgrade your kitchen, you want to buy a new car, take a picture of it and make a bunch of copies of it. and put one of them on your mirror where you get ready in the morning every day so that you can say, okay, this is why I'm going to work today, and this is going to help me make some decisions. Put it on your car dashboard, on the base of your keyboard where your computer is, if that's what you do. If you're in construction, put it on your truck dashboard or wherever it is. Put it in a place that you're going to see it on a regular basis. The most important place I can tell you to put this is take a picture of it, wrap it around your debit card or credit card. So when you pull that puppy out to make that purchase, and the first thing you see is your dream on there, hopefully it'll help you make the best decision, right? And so as you go through, make it extremely tangible and continuously build tools for yourself so you can see the traction you're making on this. Build a barometer that you can fill in every time you add a little money to the dream fund. Some of them may be little and some of them may be huge things. And so as we go through, it's just really up to you and what you want to do. So we're about to teach a 9-week class, that's 2 hours per class, in about 20 minutes. So get ready. So the steps to success start like this. Step 1 is to build a small emergency fund. This is around $1,000. And what this does for us is it eliminates the need for us to use our credit cards should we have a car breakdown or a need for a tire or something like that, a dishwasher or washing machine, dryer breakdown kind of thing, a small deductible for medical injury or bill or something that at least the medical professionals will take if you don't have insurance to get you through that immediate emergency. And these are just for the basic, simple things that will get us to the next step without having to go back into debt to do it, right? So pretty simple concept. Most of the people who come to class have that money already or really close to getting that. And so we can cross step 1 off really quick. Some of us have some money in savings, and so we just need to dedicate that money to our emergency fund. Next up, so this part here, really, I'll tell you what, when I took the class, it was week 4 of 12. The class is now only 9 weeks, and so this was week 4, and after this class, I was angry. And I was angry at myself. Nobody else, because nobody else made the decisions for me. I made the decisions. And so when I went through this process, I got angry because if I had known this sooner, I could have gotten out of debt much sooner, or maybe even better, not ever gotten in. Right? And so most of us go through this consumer debt process, credit cards, car payments, probably one of the bigger ones, student loans, and things of this nature. And so as we go through this, we start to realize that the debt snowball works just like a real snowball. Starts small, and as it rolls down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger. And so one of the differences in the teaching of this class is that we don't talk about the highest interest rate, we talk about focusing on the lowest balance. And the lowest balance works like this. So when we did ours, unfortunately, I had like 12 or 16 debts on this debt snowball, right? And the first one was only like $120. It was like a Sears card or something like that. And so we paid it off because I was able to pay the $120, but my focus was every month I was simply paying the minimum due, the minimum due, the minimum due, and I was making no traction. My snowball was rolling down the hill and melting. So I realized that if I focused on this, the first one I paid off kind of felt pretty good. And what felt really good was this. The month after I paid it off, I got what looked like a statement. And I opened it up because I was excited to see the zero balance, but I got really excited because there was actually a check in there. Because of the day of the month I paid it on, I had overpaid the interest a little bit, and I had me a big old 42-cent check. Yep. Back then, I almost could buy half a cup of coffee, but in the meantime, I was excited. I was also thinking to myself, gosh, they could have probably saved all that money, by writing the check, which probably cost more than 42 cents, and mailing that out and all that. But in the meantime, I was excited to open that letter. And then what happened was we paid another one off. It was only a couple $100. And by the way, companies like Sears and JCPenney started to go out of business because they started to focus on the wrong things. For those of you who are old enough, Sears used to have the most amazing marketing campaign. If you bought a tool from us, Craftsman Tool, you can go back 70 years later. In fact, they had a cool ad campaign that was launched during NFL championship one year, the Super Bowl, and it was an old guy bringing a hammer back. It was literally called the Hammer. Cool, sort of like made me tear up. I was like, this is awesome. But then you know what happened? They started to incentivize their clerks on something different than customer service. It was how many credit cards can you open? My bride worked at Macy's for a couple of Decembers. And just to go through the holiday season and make a little bit of extra holiday cash because we started planning and saying, hey, oh yeah, we know when Christmas is, let's go ahead and plan for that. And so while she did it, she ended up stopping working there. She loved working there, and she did it for, I think it was 2 seasons, right, babe? And the second time she went back, They literally had performance management meetings with her because she wasn't opening enough credit card accounts. And then she was like, okay, I'm here to help customers, not to do that, so I've got to go. And so it's crazy, but in the meantime, I paid that second bill off and they sent me another check. This is getting pretty cool. It's like $1.26. Yep. So I'm getting these checks in, and the best part was the next month, they're sending me advertisements and raising my credit limits. And I would send them back cancellation notices. I'd say, okay, I thank you, just go ahead and cancel that instead. And they'd say, but wait, you're such a good customer. I'm like, I know I am, but I don't want to be. So please get me out of this. And so I would cancel that. And the coolest part was the month after that, I started erasing things from my budget. I didn't have the JCPenney bill on my budget anymore. I didn't have the Sears bill on my budget anymore. I didn't have the Victoria's Secrets on my budget anymore. But they take cash. And so I was able to continue on. But in the meantime, I started to work through that. And as I started to work through that, we got to the cars. And it was a pretty cool day because we had worked really hard. And it was my turn to get a car. And typically the way our household worked was we would buy my bride a car. She was driving the kids around. We wanted the safest car for her, whatever, and I would take her hoopty. And so I would drive around in that, and I drove around in a Toyota Camry that I drove around for a long time. And I worked in the hospitality business, and my bride said, you should be a little embarrassed, because it was dinged up pretty good, and I'd be in the general manager's spot with my old Camry, but hey, it was paid for, and so we were glad to drive it. And then we drove into a car dealership one day, CarMax, and I had a budget, and I drove out with a car that I paid cash for. It was amazing. It was actually pretty funny too, because the salesperson, as we selected the vehicle, we started walking back towards the office area, and he says, well, if you could just fill this one form out, we'll go ahead and get started. And so the form was asking for my social security number and some financial information. I said, well, what is this for? He says, oh, I'm going to hand this to the finance manager while we're filling out the rest of the paperwork, and he's going to bring you back some offers from different banks to finance it. I said, I'm paying cash. And he said, oh, you're paying cash. I was like, yeah, and then he bought me a Coke. I don't think they ever do that at CarMax, but in the meantime, it was pretty cool, right? And so we drove out of there with that car. And you know what wasn't on my mind? Do I have enough money to make the next payment? It was pretty cool. That didn't happen overnight. It took some work, took some dedication to this process, but the debt snowball makes a huge difference, changes everything for you. Then you start moving at the speed of cash. The next thing, this actual footage of the first time a couple looked at some debt together. Pretty sad. Then we move into the next step. The next step is a fully funded emergency fund. This is 3 to 6 months, and in the class we kind of go through the details of what that should look like, right? So the 3 to 6 month fund is really cool because when you start looking at this and you're now out of consumer debt, you start to realize that this is not 3 to 6 months of your income. This is 3 to 6 months of your outflow just for your 4 walls, right? The basics, and maybe including the internet and some of those things. But when you don't have credit card debt and a car payment and a student loan, that's not that much money. And you start to go, well, gosh, if I get laid off again, I'll have that money in the bank. If something happens from a medical perspective and I can't work for a period of time, I'll have this money in the bank and we'll have time to plan and do something. And so before we have to go for social services and other organizations that can help us, we can really take care of ourselves for an extended period of time without the stress factor. I don't know about you, but most of us make really bad decisions when we're stressed out, right? We also don't do it with the best attitudes. And so when you start looking at this fully funded emergency fund, this brings a whole nother level of peace, knowing that you have the liquid cash you need to be able to live 3 to 6 months. After that, this is a lot of people come to class for this, and we start talking about investing. And when I talk about investing, I like to talk a little bit about the tithe. And so when I first heard about the tithe, the first tenth of your income, I started to think, well, logically, right? I'm a dude, I do some finance stuff. The church needs money to operate. Makes sense. They need money to, this is a beautiful building. We do some amazing things for the community here from the Ark, and that takes money, right? And then I started to get a little deeper in my faith and realize that if God wants it, he doesn't need my money. If he wanted any of my stuff, he would just take it. I would just be standing there going, thank you, sorry, whatever, but he could just take it. So this was a disciplinary conversation. He said, we're going to have problems with this, but if you can learn to take the first 10% and move it over here and give back. So he gave you 100%, and he's only wanting 10% back. And he said, if you can learn to do that, then you can learn to put 15% away for yourself, right? Or more, whatever you want. But learn that discipline so that you don't live beyond your means. And I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. And so the better we are at the ability to have that personal discipline. Now, mind you, look, tithing isn't a way to get into heaven, but it certainly is a discipline that God said, hey, let me teach you this, and if you can do this, I'm going to grant you more. And so investing is a great example of that. So one of the other handouts that we've given to you is a handout I love to give to the youth, partly because I didn't start this financial journey till I was almost 40 years old. And if I had this information in front of me, this Ben and Arthur story, I would understand how compound interest works, and I would pay some more attention to this. Because when you invest right, investment, which is money that you used to put into the bucket or still put into the bucket, starts to give you more income to be able to spend. And so as you're going through and it starts to compound, you may choose additional investments or whatever it is, it makes a huge difference. And so the Ben and Arthur chart goes like this. It's two brothers. One starts investing at a young age. One starts investing at an older age. They invest about $2,000 a year, which is only a little over $100 a month, and they do this for a period of time. And the younger one stops at an age, and the other one starts at an age and goes a lot longer, but never catches up because of compound interest. And so in the investing class, we start talking about the sooner you get going on this, now you have to do the other steps first. I have people who go, well, wouldn't it make sense for me to just load this up and then catch up to it? Well, you'll never catch up to it. The interest and everything else you're paying on the debt service just won't catch. And so this is the way that we find people to be most successful. Every once in a while, someone hits the jackpot, but that's not something we can plan on. We need to plan on things that are tangible and things we can do. Okay? So the next thing is something, unfortunately, that people don't ever talk about. You know who teaches you how to pay your mortgage? The bank, your mortgage broker, right? And in fact, when I was growing up, they had this for car payments and they have it for mortgage payments. They give you a cool coupon book, right? And then you tear off the coupon, you write the check, you send the check in. Now, of course, everything's done online, and they give you those 30 years worth of easy installments to make. And the reality is, most of us, particularly in Montgomery County, we're all excited. We've made money on our house, right? In the last couple of years, there's been some growth in the marketplace, but unfortunately, most of that goes back to the bank. And we don't see it because we look at the total we paid, and then we look at the amount that it's worth, but we don't look at the interest that we paid along the way. And so we love to use a calculator that we provide to you to show you how a small additional investment in the principal of your home will help you pay that off much, much faster and get out of that. If your accountant is telling you that interest is a great deduction and you should keep a mortgage, you need a new accountant. Because you only get to write off your tax rate of that. And by the way, since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2018, only 4% of Americans could do itemized deductions, which is where that happened. So most of you didn't get any benefit from it, right? And so we need to understand that paying the bank this interest is not a benefit. And so we need to work on ways that we can add to that and get that done quicker. Next up is my favorite. This is simply where we grow wealth and we give. You know, having the ability to give time is probably just as valuable or even more valuable than the financial capability of giving. I've had the opportunity to teach this class. I remember the day I met Derek, because there's a lot more testimony to that, but I showed up in Derek's office and Derek said, we've been waiting for you. We've got a guy teaching this class, but we've got some things going on, and we'd love to do this. And here we are 7+ years later, having a great time helping a lot of families.